All footage is going to be obtained from CBD3 and some may differ from the official release server as of this current moment. With the release of NTE literally coming this week as of this time recording, this is going to be most likely our launch tier list where I'm going to be explaining to you guys every single possible unit in Neverness to Everness, what they're going to be doing in their main DPS, sub-DPS, support, and sustain categories, how strong they're going to be, and who should you be investing for this game. So hey guys, MrPokke here. I'm not going to yap too much and immediately jumping right off. This is going to be the tier list for the main DPS or the on-field DPS, and this is going to be the tier list for the sub-DPS, and then this is going to be a tier list for the support or the sustain unit over here. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. And the number one most important thing before we even take a look into the tier list itself is that for the basic mechanics for Neverness to Everness is that the team building philosophy is mainly going to be an on-field DPS with a burst DPS followed by two units that are usually your support or your sustains, using your burst DPS, support, and sustains skill and ultimate momentarily, while the majority of the time will be spent with the on-field DPS. Hence the distinction between on-field as well as off-field, or more so like a burst DPS. For this entire tier list ranking, it is going to be mainly based on your early to mid-game progression, so we will not be taking into consideration endgame performance, namely the two-team endgame content, which will not be a priority for a good few weeks as you're going to be developing your city first. As such, units in the higher tier will allow for players to have a better early game or mid game experience, but note that every single unit in NTE are viable for ending content once enough development has been invested into them. Between tier 0 as well as tier 0.5, the gap is not that significant, though for units in tier 1, they are often not the best in class, while having higher difficulty to use them in the endgame, though it's not going to be impossible, hence they're ideally not going to be that recommended for players in the early game to invest. And then speaking about every single S rank, just get it out of the way right now. For this specific beginner unit battle, which you can choose your own S rank unit to consider, most players would be focusing and choosing on Sakiri as our only true tier of support. Even though we do have Hathor as an A rank support, you can essentially use them both in the same team or even split them into two different teams at the moment. The second best unit, if you already have Sakiri, will be either Daffodil or Jiuyuan. Daffodil has extremely high toughness bar damage, easier team building for Dark, and it's going to be very good for anomaly hunts and ending content. But if you aim to pull for Nanally, then Jiuyuan does have very good synergy with her via the burst DPS rotations, grouping, quick stop, as well as Esper cycles via your Blossom synergy. Other units are going to be alright, but just not as strong as the unit combinations have at the moment, namely with Nanally on launch and later on Hathor. And one last thing before we get into the actual tier list itself, like I mentioned just now, the Esper cycles. Esper cycles are an extremely integral part to NTE's combat, essentially the elemental reaction system that we have in this game. So while the basic team building will follow the formula of main DPS, burst DPS, as well as your support and sustains, you should still try your best to achieve at least one Esper cycle. So Esper cycle is pretty much going to be triggered when a player fills a cycle bar and switches into a new character, triggering that character's intro skill accompanied by the Esper cycle. If you do not have an Esper cycle, then the unit will only perform the normal intro skill without any of the additional bonus, and the bonus can be very substantial. So for example, if you're going to be swapping between an Anima as well as Cosmos unit, you will trigger Blossom to trigger Vita Buds, which will then deal damage in area up to 3 at once on top of the additional effects for every single unit. There are also 3 element Esper cycles which stacks on top of Blossom, and the same can also be set for Discord, which is going to be more focused on toughness bar damage. Hence, Daffodil going to be a very high priority target, especially if you're going to be skipping Nanally. For now, you don't have to worry about this too much with regards to the in-depth combat. I'm just going to be jumping right in for every single unit and what they do, so you can determine for yourself and feel the game and how you play when you experience it on the launch itself. So we're going to be going through the order of main DPS followed by sub-DPS followed by supports as well as sustains. The main DPS are pretty much going to be units you'll be spending majority of the time on field due to their damage being either tied to your basics, dodge counters, or enhanced states via the skill or ultimate, compared to a sub-DPS or burst DPS who only needs a few seconds to let go of their overall total damage output. This is not to say that main DPS will deal more damage or burst DPS or rather sub-DPS will deal more damage. It is just how long do you need them to be on field to let go of their overall damage. So starting off with the strongest main DPS on launch, and that is going to be Nanally, which is going to be pretty much the classic launch unit syndrome. Her skill is going to be focusing on AoE to help you clear mobs, and the ultimate, the enhanced state, has an extremely high burst damage during this window against your elites as well as bosses. Her talent also increased Blossom damage, making her one of the core members for any Blossom teams, especially if you tie her up with Jiuyuan. The key weakness on an on-field DPS for Nanally is that she's kind of weak to enemies who move around too much or they interrupt her attack chain, but that being said, you can definitely definitely overcome this, especially if you're going to be running with Jiuyuan, which does have the grouping capabilities as well as allowing you to quick swap. She also does have this wall running passive for exploration, which further improves with One Awakening for her A6. With regards to her arc, her S1 or the Rate Up arc is going to be better than Raging Flame, but Raging Flame's passive, while it's not going to be too useful because she's going to be a basic attack DPS, this arc does a very good raw stats in terms of attack as well as crit damage. You can in fact get Raging Flame, in fact a lot of the arcs you guys see over here, even for all the S ranks, you can pretty much get them for free via missions or the overall anomaly fights, such as for example Raging Flame right here. You can consider Battle Pass, which is going to be slightly better in raw damage, but S1 would still be 20% better than the Battle Pass. And then with regards to team building, you can just run Jiuyuan as a sub-DPS, Sakyu and Zero as a support. If you do not have a Jiuyuan or a Sakyu, you can also consider running Hathor as a replacement. And then for the overall playstyle, it's very simple. Use a skill to group as well as deal AoE damage to the enemies, cast your ultimate and just let go of your basic attack during this enhanced ultimate state, fill up your Psycho Bar, and then you swap into MC to cast your Blossom because MC is going to be a Cosmos unit. Remember to always swap to MC for a Nanally team because Blossom is going to be a key part of your overall damage, especially when you combine this with Jiuyuan. Now moving on to the next unit, and that is going to be Chiz, and yes, this is going to be a free E6 S5 as long as you're going to be playing the game and leveling through the missions and progressions. Chiz is pretty much one of, if not the best early game DPS because she deals fixed damage with her skill, which you can kind of just think of her as like a true wheelchair unit because fixed damage does not give a damn about crit whatsoever. So the fixed damage can be seen from this counter at the top of a bar, and in the early game when your development is still very weak, you have no crit rate, no crit damage whatsoever, Chiz is pretty much the only unit in the game that can consistently hit for like 50,000 over because it is going to be, once again, fixed damage. She also has a global passive of earning 250,000 to 500,000 funds, though that being said, it's going to be only a one-time earn, so once you hit the cap, you can't earn anymore. But even though this is going to be only a single usage, free is free, and this is going to be extremely valuable for your early city development. You can check out our beginner guide right here to see why funds is going to be so important for your early game in NTE. And then for the arcs, like I mentioned, she's going to be getting a free arc all the way at the max dupe, so just use this, the end, it is the best synergy. For the team building combinations for Chiz as a main DPS, you can run her as a wheelchair with 3 different sustains. So you have Fadia giving you the shield, Adler giving the debuff as well as more shields, and then Edgar is just going to be giving you even more heals. You pretty much almost never die and just spam your skill as well as ultimate to deal fixed damage against any targets. If you want Chiz to do higher damage, you can consider running a charge Esper cycle team, getting Blossom by swapping the Mint, and then charge with Hathor, which also gives Chiz additional charge and energy. And then for the overall playstyle of Chiz, it's also going to be very simple. You want to start off with basic to get off your stacks for your fixed additional damage, cast your skill and ultimate when you enter into this ultimate state, and then you press your E whenever this bar during your ultimate state is going to be positive. Now this ultimate state bar, you can see this is going to be negative 16%. It is going to be completely RNG, so just try to press this skill whenever this bar is going to be at a higher number. But if you don't get a higher number, then it is what it is. Don't worry about it. For the Esper charge cycle, you want to let Chiz finish up a rotation, swap to any anima unit, and then go back into Hathor using your burst rotation and then use Chiz on the field. Now note that this team's rotation is not going to be that smooth because we don't really have a very good anima support as of this current moment. Now moving on to the next main DPS, and that is going to be Baicang. This is going to be considered a more generalist DPS because you can in fact dodge and attack at the same time while having 2 different modes between single target and AoE damage, on top of having some extent of grouping as well as self-healing capabilities, which is going to be determined by this little special effect called Silence Mode or the Obfuscate Mode. His ultimate also has the game's very unique built-in 10% execute for all targets or 5% against bosses. However, even though you does have a built-in execute, you still will use this ultimate as soon as possible, especially when you fight against any scenarios, so it is just a slight clear time increase when you reach that final 5% or 10% when you eventually get your ultimate back up again. During this ultimate mode, you also have a one-hit immunity from fatal damage just in case, because he does consume 3% of his current HP with any blast or silence power card, which is going to be seen from a basic or your skill. For Baicang's arc, is pretty much going to be free from the mission, so you do not need to get a battle pass option. Pretty much just run this and you're going to be good to go. And then for the team building, just use a Discord team running Daffodil to break Talon's bar damage, Fadia to sustain and to do the damage split, Hanyo to support. You can also consider swapping Fadia for Adler for a little bit more higher break efficiency and just do a little bit more damage. His playstyle is going to be slightly more complicated to other DPS because you can split between single target, AoE, or self-sustain. For the highest DPS potential, especially against bosses, single target is going to be preferred, so you you want to activate your dodge into your skill and then cast your ultimate while spamming basic attack, so that during the ultimate stage, your single target damage is going to be a lot higher. For the Esper cycle, you want to swap in Daffodil, then do Hathor or Fadia to trigger Discord and get the additional benefits from Discord. And then with the S rank units out of the way, let's just jump straight into Mint, which is, yay, this is going to be our best friend ever since launch. We have known her since day one. But unfortunately for Mint, due to the abundance of main DPS units, her competition is going to be extremely stiff, especially if you're going to be already planning to go for either Nanally or Chiz as the initial main DPS. For the Arc, the best in store is going to be the Battle Pass Arc, which is going to be giving you additional raw stats. Otherwise, you can just go for Clear Skies to increase your ultimate damage. For the team building, you are going to be considered running Jiuyuan as a Sub-DPS setup along with Sakyu as well as MC as a support to play a hyper carry Mint for the waifu enjoyers. And then for her playstyle, it's extremely straightforward. Cast your ultimate, cast your skill, and spam on basic. That is pretty much it. And then for the Esper cycle, you pretty much just copy and paste the Nanally's Blossom cycle, swap into MC, which is going to be a Cosmos unit to trigger additional Vita Bud. Now, another A rank unit, and that is gonna be Aurelia. This is gonna be having a very similar circumstance compared to Mint, which is gonna be an A rank DPS suffering quite a bit when compared to S ranks on launch, but you can also just run a very similar hyper carry setup for waifu enjoyers. She's gonna be primarily an AoE DPS that relies on her enhanced state post ultimate to deal AoE damage while using the jellyfish to deal additional damage while you're gonna be dodging. So the arc is just pretty much gonna be free, just use it for missions, but the team building are gonna be running another variation of hyper carry, but focusing on Discord instead. So you are going to be running Daffodil, Hathor, as well as Hathor. You can also consider swapping Hathor out to Sakyu for more damage. For Aurelia's playstyle, she's going to be focusing on the ultimate duration, so you cast your ultimate to put the targets together with her skill entering the condenser state for 12 seconds, and during this state, she has this special dodge that you can use the jellyfish for additional damage. For the Esper cycle, due to the effect of Nova lasting only 5 seconds, which is really short, it is much better to proc Scorch instead for 15 seconds DOT damage by using any incantation unit, which is usually going to be your Adler or Sakiri, followed by Daffodil, followed by Helena for additional damage, and then you swap back into Daffodil for Discord as well as additional toughness bar. So that is pretty much going to be all of our main DPS, and now moving on to the sub-DPS or the burst DPS. Like I mentioned, it does not mean that they deal less damage, it just means that the damage on field is going to be far worse compared to an on field or main DPS, where you are going to be essentially relying on your skill, ultimate or intro for burst damage, and you swap back into the main DPS once everything is going to be done. And one of, if not the best sub-DPS we have right now, and that is going to be Jiuyuan, especially if you're going to be pairing Jiuyuan alongside Nanally, which has the highest DPS potential on launch. But Jiuyuan does require players to do quick swapping, so try to learn this for her maximum damage output. So for Jiuyuan, her kit is gonna be generating bullets, and you shoot them out by quick swapping into another DPS because she can in fact stay on field to finish shooting every single bullet. And then you can cast your skill to group targets before swapping into your main DPS, and yes, she can gain bullets with things like dodge counter as well as intro skills. She also has this unique DOT which turns from the green effect to the black rose effect later on, where the bullets will prioritize the DOT targets with black rose, though this damage is going to be fixed and is not affected by any traditional DOT sources. For Jiuyuan specifically, she has extremely impressive burst damage synergy, especially with Blossom, and one of the best grouping abilities in the game, making her extremely comfortable for overall exploration as well as against mob combat. This skill also works as quick swap, so you can just cast a skill and swap immediately to another DPS to finish the remaining skill animation. Due to the Blossom's Esper cycle relying on a constant Vita Bud generation, you need to swap around very frequently to ideally get 3 buds for maximum damage, further improved to 6 due to Jiuyuan's passive, making her crucial for Blossom teams. For the arc, it's gonna be free from the overroll, so just use this, otherwise you can just use the Battle Pass arc for additional crit rate. And then for the team building, it is gonna be best in store with Nanally at the moment, but I can see pretty versatile usage for Jiuyuan due to her nature of being a quick swap burst DPS, so we might see even more usage for her if other DPS are gonna be sharing the same element. And then for the playstyle, you want to cast your ultimate for damage, skill to group enemies, and then long press your basic to let go of the bullets while quick swapping into the next unit, usually MC to proc your Bloom or Sakiri for a 12% damage taken increase, and then finally swap into Nanally or any main DPS to deal additional damage. Now, moving on to the next best, or rather very competitive sub-DPS or burst DPS, that is gonna be Daffodil. She does have the highest toughness bar damage or single target damage against bosses in the entire game. Very good potential in the future for Nova, Scorch, or Discord teams, and might be one of the best sub-DPS purely because of the ability to parry extremely frequently while dealing tremendous toughness bar damage. Now, Daffodil's role is pretty much to deal as much toughness bar damage as possible, but beyond that, her unique ability, Phantom Stack, can instantly charge her cycle gauge as well as ultimate energy to deal even more toughness bar damage when you're going to be swapping her. But that being said, this does come with a prerequisite where you have to perform a parry against a boss, so if the target does not have a lot of parryable attacks, then this ability will be largely useless, and as such, Daffodil is going to be a very environment-dependent unit. So in the right fights, she definitely has a tier 2 potential, but in the wrong fights and you can't make use of this, then she's going to fall off pretty hard. Despite wanting to parry her a lot, remember that Daffodil is still going to be considered a sub or a burst DPS and not a main DPS because the on-field damage is going to be falling off very quickly. On a side note, Daffodil also has extremely good awakening abilities from her dupes, which ties to break damage and break efficiency, making boss fights a lot more manageable, especially if you're gonna be speed running. For the arcs, it's also once again going to be free from the overroll. Perfect fit, just use this because we do have the additional toughness damage and break intensity from Youthful Fantasy. For team building, the current best of Daffodil is going to be with Baicang, but this team does rely on environments quite a lot depending if you have access to parryable attacks. As of right now, Baicang is going to be the best DPS, but we might see more incantation DPS in the future, where Fadia can also be swapped with Adler and Hanyo can be swapped with Sakiri. For the playstyle with Daffodil, you want to take note of these two little flames on top after casting your ultimate, which is going to be the 2 stacks of Phantom Step. After casting your ultimate, you can instantly swap into your on-field DPS and wait for any parryable attacks to swap back into Daffodil up to twice. After getting these 2 stacks, you can then cast your enhanced skill, which is going to be called Echoes, for additional damage. For the Esper cycle, it is going to be very similar to Aurelia, where Scorch lasting 15 seconds will make this ideal because 5 seconds is just going to be usually too short. As such, Baicang at max cycle bar is going to be swapped with Daffodil for Scorch, and then you swap into any psych unit for Discord, which is usually going to be Fadia or Hathor. Then moving on to the next sub-DPS edge rank, and that is going to be Hathor, and wow, she is big. Very simplistic DPS with a high burst damage, one of if not the best burst DPS purely from a damage perspective, without as much utility compared to Jiuyuan's grouping or Daffodil's toughness damage. Hathor's skill can actually be pressed and held for a longer time to charge and intentionally take hits from the enemy, generating this thing called the express delivery power for energy as well as additional damage during her ultimate phase over here. So the key unit for Remora teams, which is going to be running our Hathor, which is kind of like a crowd control debuff that slows their speed as well as attack speed, making your team comparatively faster when it comes to dodging as well as attacking. Now, unfortunately, Lakshana as an element is going to be a little bit awkward with the current DPS we have, which one of the only other DPS, if you can even consider him as a real DPS, is going to be Skia, because he also acts more so as like a support. And without a dude for Hathor like A1 or A2, you cannot consistently get your ultimate rotations lined up due to the lack of energy. So as of this very moment, the real name DPS that she can kind of run with is going to be Skia, though she can still be paired with Nanally for the Remora as well as charge combination. For the arcs, Raging Flames once again is going to be free from the overall, so just run this. Team building, Nanally will technically have a higher damage ceiling purely because Skia's DPS potential cannot really compare with Nanally, and this can also trigger charge for faster energy regeneration for Hathor herself. That being said, Jiuyuan when running with Nanally is going to give you more damage due to quick swapping as well as grouping. So for Hathor's real team, it will likely take shape when an S-rank Lakshana unit is going to be releasing in the future. And then for the playstyle, you want to swap in the Hathor right before the enemy attacks and then long press her skill, taking the hits up to 2 times and then let go of her skill to get the maximum amount of express delivery. So once this is going to be done, cast your ultimate will get the maximum damage and then click on your skill 3 times, which is going to be called Cyclone Strike for the maximum damage rotation, and you swap back into your on-field DPS. For the Esper cycle, you can swap into MC for Remora or Nanally for the charge. Now moving on to one of, if not the best DPS unit or sub-DPS unit that everybody will have, and that is going to be Zero, or our main character. Zero is a very simplistic and strong kit unit-wise and can be used by pretty much every single team due to the ability of their skill instantly filling up the cycle bar, proccing once every 16 seconds, as you can see from this 100 cycle rate. Honestly, they kind of feel like a support, but they can also do a decent amount of damage over time, which is why they're gonna be known as a burst or sub-DPS. Cosmos on Zero's element is going to be extremely crucial for Remora, Blossom, and Charge, making Zero one of the most important units in the game to trigger especially your Blossom. Invest in them if you're going to be using any DPS in this class. For the arc, best install is going to be from a spending event in terms of damage, but you can also use a day off, which is going to be free from your missions, while having impressive charge efficiency to cast your ultimates faster. And then for the team building, current best in slot highest DPS team is once again going to be Nanally and Jiuyuan, followed by Psyche for the highest amount of utility from a support buff. The playstyle for MC or Zero is going to be very straightforward. Cast your ultimate, cast your skill, and after you cast your skill, you have a maximum cycle gauge, swap into the next unit, and you can instantly trigger the Esper cycle. As of right now, like I mentioned, because this is the only Cosmos support in the entire game, always use the MC to proc Blossom with Anima teammates like Nanally and Jiuyuan, while also using them to swap back into MC for the fastest Vita Bud regeneration. And now we're going to be moving on into the final category of units, and that is going to be the support and sustains. Starting off, which is going to be Sakiri. This is one of, if not the best units to pick from the selector, because of a role as a supporter is going to be second to none, having grouping, crowd control, and damage amplification all combined into one. Sakiri also has a very good passive, which is going to be seen from a 10% defense now for 20 seconds, 25% DOT damage taken for each different DOT up to 100%, 30% team-wide attack buff for 20 seconds with an A4, which is going to be one dupe, as well as the ultimate giving another attack buff based on Sakiri's own attack. Now, do know that the 10% defense now is only going to be for suppressed enemies, and they are not going to be effective for bosses because bosses are immune to airborne as well as suppress itself. Now, Sakiri's grouping will come from both her skill as well as basic attack, but her basic has a local passive where she can continuously pull in the targets in the cone while having the ability to instantly kill overall mobs if they are going to be weak enough, but this does have a 180-second cooldown for every single digestion. For the arcs, pretty much just use it, it's going to be completely for free, and in fact, speaking of this, Good Boys Grand Avenger is one of, if not the best arc to have for any support because it is one of the only ones that gives you charge efficiency as well as a team-wide attack buff. So very good arc, just invest in this. And then for the team building, you can honestly run Sakiri with any team you want for any main DPS. So as of this moment, the highest damage is generally either going to be Nanally and Jiuyuan or Daffodil and Baicang against bosses. And then for the playstyle for Sakiri is also going to be very simple. Press your skill or hold your skill to start grouping your enemies, cast your ultimate for the damage as well as the attack buff, then swap in your teammates. Remember, crowd control will not be working on bosses, so just keep that in mind. And then for the Esper cycle, it will be more or less determined by which DPS you want to run her with, so be fluid with Sakiri's overall usage. You want to run with Hex, Scorch, etc. Then next is gonna be Hathor, which is gonna be the best A-rank agent due to support capabilities, comparable to Sakiri but for the second team. This is also a free unit on launch, so please invest in Hathor, especially if you do not intend to get Sakiri whatsoever. But on this note, it will still be highly recommended for players to get Sakiri just because the endgame is gonna be 2-team content, or even if you're gonna be running a single team content, you can just run both of them together as a hyper carry setup. So for Hathor, her entire kit is going to be very simplistic as well, where she'll pretty much just give an insane amount of attack buff from the skill, ultimate, as well as her passive. Her passive is also going to be pretty interesting because it casts a debuff on the enemy target by lowering their attack as well, making boss fights more manageable, especially in the early game where you cannot take as much damage. For the specific effect for Nova, it actually increases our Hathor's attack drain, making it an even higher to 16% of Hathor's base attack or 20% of the enemy's initial attack. But as I mentioned earlier on, because of Nova's short 5-second duration, it is very small window to actually make use of this, so generally speaking, Chaos units will still be running Scorch instead. For the arc for Hathor, pretty much just going to be running this blow up the crowd, free from the overall, has a lot of attack buff, so just run this, it's going to be best in slot. And for team building, once again, it's very similar to Sakiri, where you can run Hathor in pretty much any other team you want, for Nanally, Jiuyuan, or for Baicang, Daffodil, whichever it's going to be, and most likely in the future DPS units as well. For the playstyle, it's also extremely simple, comparable to Sakiri, except she wants to cast her ultimate first, followed by the skill, and then swap into your teammates. Her Esper cycle is actually not that important because you can run it in Blossom pretty easily, and Stain and Nova are generally not widely used compared to the other Esper cycles. If you do want to use Hathor in a Discord team, you will be casting with an Incantation intro, followed by a Daffodil into a Hathor to proc a Disorder, and then swap to either Daffodil for more parries or main DPS to deal more damage. And then for another unit, this is not going to be a support anymore, but more so for a sustain, and that is going to be Fadia. Now, Fadia, first of all, her trait is going to be absolutely, If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But that being said, she does have the best tank or sustain in the game with the ability to have a damage split and damage reflection, greatly improving the overall durability for pretty much any team. Now, Fadia, her damage share is going to be seen from this thing right here called All Eyes on Me, and her skill existence is going to be where you're going to be getting your damage reflect from destructive experience. The passive also allows you to drain the enemy's max HP, as well as just straight up increase your entire team's max HP by 10%. Also, that passive's name, like a baby yearning for nourishment, and the subtext being, yep, you know what kind of unit she's gonna be, right? But that being said, her ultimate is gonna be where she has an enhanced state, which can increase the overall self-sustain while having ultimate energy regeneration, but you need Fadia to stay on the field, otherwise she will exit this ultimate state. That being said, the damage split for Fadia is always gonna be active even when she's off-field, so after ultimate burst damage, you can freely swap into another unit. But one very important thing in mind, especially for an A0 Fadia, is that at A0, you only get 50% damage split instead of the 75% running A1, so you still want to ideally try to dodge and parry whenever possible. Don't just brute force and face tank anything, because especially against endgame bosses, you're probably gonna die doing that. And then her Awakens are definitely gonna be very strong as well, because you can see from here the A1 will change the damage ratio from 50 to 75% damage split. And then for the arc, Eternal Waltz is going to be free for the mission, so just run this, perfect fit, just grind it and go. And then for the team building, as though this current moment, best in slot is going to be Daffodil and Baicang for Discord, but she can be rather versatile for any content because of the damage split as well as a little bit more of a sustain. And then for Fadia's playstyle, cast your ultimate, deal all of the burst damage with a skill, and then you just exit the field. It is super straightforward. For the Esper cycle, if you want to proc an incantation unit, such as for example Baicang, into Daffodil, into Fadia, this can help you activate Nova as well as Discord at the same time, which can be a pretty nice damage increase because of Fadia's passive with Nova. Okay, for the last 3 units, I'm just going to speedrun this because I think they're going to be a little bit more niche. But if you want to just an overall general key of what they're going to be doing, Skia, which is going to be the dog guy, he's going to be a support which can also be used as a main DPS, best used as a quick swap support for either Daffodil or Hathor teams to quickly apply Esper cycles as well as damage. Now, as a gas user for Skia, he can also run this Good Boys Grand Adventure, which is going to be, once again, like I mentioned, an extremely strong S rank arc given for free for the team-wide attack buff. He also does have decent on-field DPS capabilities because of his awakening and his skill enhancing his basic attack. For Hathor, which is going to be the Cane guy which you see from Antique Shop, he's going to be a shielder with a lot of debuffs, giving a random debuff, but unfortunately it's going to be a little bit too RNG dependent, whether it be going to be an attack debuff, Esper rest down, or a 10% break efficiency lasting for 15 seconds. Ideally against bosses, you would want a break efficiency, but if you're going to be running an Esper main DPS like Baicang, then the additional 10% rest can be very well as well. I would say as of right now, Esper with Chaos is quite nice, but we are going to be waiting for Lacrimosa, so we might see more play with Hathor in the future. And then one last unit is going to be Hathor. He is the only unit in the entire game, A rank or not, that can actually heal your entire team. Unfortunately for Hathor, his only role is just heals. So that's pretty much it. So not really a very key unit because you can use dodge, you can get shields, you can just do more damage, or generally you're probably not going to be using him. And with that, one last time, this is going to be our 3 different tier lists for all of our main DPS, sub-DPS, and support plus sustains. Let me know what you guys think, and hopefully this video has been helpful as I go through every single unit and their capabilities. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys at Neverness to Everness when the game launches on the 29th of April, right? So with that, we've come to the end of today's content. Let me know what you guys in the thoughts and comments below. Word of the day is going to be coming. Join Twitch, join Discord. Use code POKE10 for Gamers Up. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.